Have you ever sat down to watch a Formula 1 race and thought, man, this is just boring? We've all been there. With all the technology, speed, and strategy that goes into F1, you expect to be on the edge of your seat, but sometimes the race falls flat. More often than not, it's not the cars or drivers who are to blame, it's the track. A poorly designed circuit can turn even the most promising race into a snooze-fest, leaving fans disappointed and drivers frustrated. Today, we're diving into the worst tracks in Formula 1 history. These are the circuits that let down everyone, drivers, fans, and even the sport itself, whether they were painfully boring, dangerously unsafe, or just plain unpopular. These tracks earned their spot on the worst list. We'll look at what made them so infamous, and dig into what drivers and fans had to say about their experiences on these notorious circuits. Let's kick things off with Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, a track that sounds glamorous, but was a massive letdown in reality. You'd think that a Formula 1 race in Las Vegas would be a spectacle, with cars zooming past neon-lit casinos, right? Well, not quite. Instead of racing down the famous strip, drivers found themselves speeding around a parking lot. Yes, a parking lot. The track was flat, lifeless, and incredibly uninspiring. There was no elevation change, and the layout seemed to be designed to squeeze the circuit into an awkward space, not to create a thrilling race. Alan Jones, a former world champion, didn't hold back when describing the circuit, calling it a Mickey Mouse track. The design consisted of repetitive, looping corners that took a toll on drivers' necks because of the constant right-hand turns. Overtaking was nearly impossible in this narrow circuit, and drivers like Nelson Piquet complained that it offered no real challenge, just heat and frustration. In fact, Nelson Piquet went as far as to say it was like racing in a car park. Quite literally. There was nothing challenging about it, and overtaking was virtually impossible. Spectators didn't have it much better. The brutal Nevada heat made watching races unbearable, with no shade in sight, forcing fans to endure hours under the blazing sun. Add to that the desert winds blowing sand across the track, creating treacherous driving conditions. And it's easy to see why this track didn't last long. After just 2 years, Formula 1 packed up and left Caesars Palace, and no one really missed it. With only 40,000 people attending over its 2-year stint, this Las Vegas experiment was quickly forgotten. Next up is Okayama, Japan, a track that most fans have probably forgotten about. Unlike the legendary Suzuka circuit, Okayama was stuck in the middle of nowhere, and getting there was a nightmare. The track hosted the Pacific Grand Prix, but its remote location made it difficult for fans to reach. Those who made the trip through Japan's winding countryside were met with poor transportation options and a sense that the race wasn't worth the hassle. The track itself was narrow and slow, filled with tight corners that frustrated drivers. Damon Hill once described the experience as more of a procession than a race, with overtaking being next to impossible. The drivers weren't the only ones disappointed. Fans who managed to reach the track were stuck with inadequate facilities. There were long lines for everything, food to restrooms, and the general consensus was that the track wasn't equipped to handle a large-scale F1 event. Jean Alesi echoed Hill's thoughts, commenting that the race felt like lap after lap of nothing. With drivers locked into position and unable to make significant moves, fans in the stands shared their frustration, watching as cars circled the track in a monotonous rhythm. Unsurprisingly, Okayama only hosted 2 races before being dropped from the F1 calendar. Sochi Autodrom, built around the infrastructure of the 2014 Winter Olympics, had all the ingredients for a successful Formula 1 venue. On paper, at least its location in the picturesque Olympic Park seemed perfect, and the track's long straights and sharp corners appeared to offer opportunities for exciting racing. But as soon as the cars hit the track, it became clear that Sochi was anything but thrilling. The long straights led into tight 90-degree corners, which made overtaking nearly impossible. Lewis Hamilton, who won the inaugural Russian Grand Prix in 2014, said afterwards, "It's nice to drive, but the racing is, well, there's not much of it." The narrow racing lines added to the problem, forcing drivers to follow each other in a single file most of the race. Fans noticed the lack of action almost immediately, and Sochi quickly gained a reputation as one of the most boring tracks on the calendar. Even though Sochi was in one of Russia's most scenic regions, the picturesque setting couldn't make up for the processional nature of the races. Between 2014 and 2020, the average number of overtakes per race at Sochi was among the lowest on the calendar, and fans dreaded seeing the track return year after year. When Sochi was finally dropped in 2021, there was little mourning. As Hamilton put it, it's just not a track that encourages proper racing. Yas Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi is, without a doubt, one of the most visually stunning tracks in the Formula 1 calendar. The races are held at night under the glow of floodlights, with a futuristic Yas hotel towering over the circuit. On paper, it seems like the perfect place for a season finale, but despite its breathtaking backdrop, the races often left fans underwhelmed. The layout was the main problem. Long straights led into tight corners, making overtaking difficult, especially in the third sector. Fernando Alonso once called it a parking lot, referring to the tight, twisty final corners where fast cars struggle to pass slower ones. Even with DRS zones, drivers found it hard to make meaningful moves. Sebastian Vettel, after winning the 2013 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, admitted that while the venue was stunning, the race just didn't live up to the spectacle. For fans, Yas Marina felt like it should have delivered epic finales, but instead, they often watched processional races where positions were locked in early. In an attempt to fix this, the track underwent some modifications in recent years to improve overtaking opportunities, but Yas Marina still hasn't shaken its reputation for producing lackluster races. Nivelles-Baulers in Belgium was a textbook case of a safe but boring track. Built as a safer alternative to the notoriously dangerous Spa-Francorchamps, Nivelles ticked all of the safety boxes. Wide runoff areas, smooth tarmac, and minimal barriers. But in creating a safe circuit, the designers stripped away all the excitement that made Spa so thrilling. Emerson Fittipaldi, who won the first race at Nivelles in 1972, described the track as too easy for Formula One cars, saying you could drive it with one hand on the wheel. The flat, featureless design meant there were no elevation changes, no challenging corners, and no real opportunity for overtaking. For fans, it felt more like watching cars drive around a parking lot than a Grand Prix. With a lack of excitement on track, spectators didn't flock to Nivelles, and attendance was poor. Financial troubles soon followed, and after hosting just 2 Grand Prix, the circuit was abandoned. Nivelles remains a footnote in F1 history, remembered more for its lack of thrills than for any memorable racing moments. When most people think of Brazilian Grand Prix races, they picture the legendary Interlagos circuit in Sao Paulo, with its sweeping corners and dynamic elevation changes. Jacarepagua in Rio de Janeiro, however, was the opposite of that. Built on flat, reclaimed land, Jacarepagua was monotonous, with long straights and wide corners that offered little in the way of excitement. Drivers like Ayrton Senna, who hailed from Brazil, were critical of the track. Senna once described it as soulless and lacking the technical complexity of Interlagos. The heat and humidity in Rio made racing there physically brutal for the drivers, but the real challenge came not from the track itself, but from surviving the tropical conditions. Races often felt like endurance tests, with drivers crossing the finish line drenched in sweat and utterly exhausted. Fans didn't connect with the circuit either, and the crowds at Jacarepagua were consistently smaller than those at Interlagos. The atmosphere lacked the same electric energy, and many fans preferred to make the trip to Sao Paulo. Eventually, Jacarepagua was torn down to make way for Olympic venues, and few people mourned the loss. A Formula One race in Detroit, the heart of the American automotive industry. Sounded like a brilliant idea on paper, but in reality, the Detroit Grand Prix became infamous for all the wrong reasons. The track wound through the narrow, bumpy streets of downtown Detroit, and the rough surface caused problems from the start. Drivers like Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna had little good to say about the circuit. Prost complained that the cars rattled violently as they made their way around the bumpy course, while Senna compared racing in Detroit to driving through a monsoon, thanks to the terrible conditions. Overtaking was nearly impossible, and drivers spent more time fighting the track than each other. Despite attempts to resurface the track and make layout changes, the complaints kept coming. The racing was frustrating, the track conditions were poor, and fans were left watching lackluster performances. After 6 years, Formula One abandoned Detroit, leaving the city's F1 legacy as one of frustration and disappointment. Avus in Berlin might be one of the strangest and most dangerous tracks Formula One has ever raced on. Built in the 1920s, Avus was essentially a drag strip with 2 long straights connected by 2 sharp corners. The most infamous part of the track was the 43-degree bank turn, made entirely of bricks, which drivers quickly nicknamed the Wall of Death. Sterling Moss, who raced at Avus, described the banking as terrifying, with cars hurtling around the steep curve at breakneck speeds. The one and only F1 race held there in 1959 was overshadowed by tragedy when French driver Jean Barra lost his life in a crash on the bank corner. His car flipped over the top of the banking and crashed, marking a dark day in Formula One history. After the tragedy, Formula One never returned to Avus, and the track was deemed too dangerous for modern racing. It stands as a reminder of the risks drivers once faced and the dangers of pushing speed over safety. Zeltweg was another example of a track that had no business hosting a Formula One race. Built on a military airfield in Austria, Zeltweg was essentially a runway with a couple of corners tacked on. There were no elevation changes, no technical sections, and no real challenge for drivers. It felt more like a drag race than a Grand Prix. The surface of the track was a major issue as well. As the race went on, the tarmac began to crumble, making it difficult for drivers to maintain control. Chunks of the road were kicked up by the cars, creating a hazard for both the drivers and their tires. Lorenzo Badini, who won the only F1 race held at Zeltweg, later admitted that the crumbling track was more dangerous than exciting. After just one race, Zeltweg was replaced by the much better Oostenrijkring, and Formula 1 never returned to the airfield. It remains a forgotten chapter in F1 history, known more for its failings than any memorable racing moments. The Jeddah Corniche circuit, which debuted in 2021 for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, has quickly become one of the most polarizing and widely criticized tracks in Formula 1. Despite its high-speed nature and the thrill it generates, it has been slammed for its inherent dangers, controversial location, and lack of genuine racing quality. It is now regarded as one of the worst F1 tracks for several key reasons. First and foremost, Jeddah's design poses a significant risk to driver safety. The track is extremely fast, with an average lap speed of 157 miles per hour, making it the second fastest on the calendar after Monza. However, unlike Monza's wide, flowing layout, Jeddah is more akin to Monaco in its narrow, wall-lined streets, leaving very little room for error. Drivers are forced to navigate 27 corners, many of them flat out, while being surrounded by tight barriers. The lack of runoff areas adds to the danger, as even a small mistake can result in a major accident. Sergio Perez called it the most dangerous place on the calendar, and Mick Schumacher's horrific crash during the 2022 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix qualifying session demonstrated the circuit's perils. Schumacher's car was destroyed, and while he thankfully walked away unharmed, the crash highlighted how even top drivers can fall victim to Jeddah's hazards. Max Verstappen also criticized the track, particularly after a chaotic 2021 race, suggesting that the layout was unsuitable for modern F1 cars. While the high-speed nature of the circuit sounds exciting, it often translates into processional racing with few overtaking opportunities. With many high-speed turns and limited braking zones, the ability to pull off clean overtakes is minimal, despite the track's long straights. Drivers are often forced to follow one another in single file, waiting for mistakes rather than creating opportunities to pass. Verstappen himself has noted that while the adrenaline rush is undeniable, the narrowness of the circuit and the speed combine to make clean racing difficult, creating more potential for accidents than any exciting battles. Although most drivers acknowledge the intensity and speed that Jeddah offers, the response has been mixed. Carlos Sainz, for example, mentioned that the adrenaline he felt reminded him of his early racing days in Macau, but even those who appreciate the track's thrills acknowledge the substantial risk it presents. The FIA has made several modifications, such as widening corners to improve visibility and adding safety measures to reduce risk. However, the fundamental issues with the track remain, with many arguing that the track layout is too dangerous for Formula 1. So what do you think? Did we miss any tracks that deserve a spot on the worst list? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more motorsport content.